Yeah, well, part 3 or whatever this is. Let's go on. GE officials say the disparity between American revenue and American profit is the result of ordinary business factors, such as investment in overseas markets and heavy lending losses in the United States. Except, of course, this all happened before the crash. The company also says that the nation's workers benefit from GE's profits overseas. We believe that winning in markets outside the United States increases U.S. exports, maybe perhaps that's 6% for GE, and jobs, Mr. Samuels said through a spokeswoman. If U.S. companies aren't competitive outside of their home, then it will mean fewer, not more jobs in the United States, as the business will go to a non-U.S. competitor. So in other words, what the spokeswoman is saying is that American labor should be working for, let's say, $2 an hour, because that's what it essentially boils down to in terms of profits for these multinationals. It is only because they can reduce the labor costs that they can get away, and their tax breaks on top of it, that they can even make such huge profits to start with. The company doesn't specify how much of its global tax savings derive from active financing, but it called the whole thing significant. Stock analysts estimate the tax benefit to GE to be hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Minimizing taxes is so important to GE and other multinationals, I might add, that Mr. Samuels has placed tax strategists in decision-making positions in any major manufacturing facilities and businesses around the globe. Mr. Samuels, a graduate of Vanderbilt University and the University of Chicago, that might ring some bells for those who know about Chicago economics, declined to be interviewed. Company officials acknowledged that the tax department has expanded since he joined the company in 1988, and said it now had 975 employees just in their tax department alone. Transforming the most creative strategies of the tax team into law is another extensive operation. GE trends heavily towards lobbying, more than $200 million over the last decade, according to the Center of Responsive Politics, and so on and so on. Okay? So that's the gist of it. Multinational companies basically feel it is their responsibility to get out dividends for their major shareholders across the globe. And those shareholders aren't the people. They aren't the regular employees, the regular people in any country. I could go on and on with this article, but that's essentially the gist of it. These companies do not care about people. What they care about is their quarterly returns and their return to their major shareholders. They do not care who gets hurt or squashed in the process. They're not in any way patriotic to any one nation. All they care about is the profit margin. This is what people globally really need to realize, because even as these multinationals pretend to essentially bring up a middle class somewhere else, let's say, China or India, anyone on the tail end is going to be left behind. And so in actuality, what they're doing is they're not raising living standards, they're basically lowering living standards to what they would call acceptable levels. The reason why multinational companies prefer to get their tax breaks and to get their labor from overseas is because it's a no-brainer. Labor overseas is much cheaper, depending on which market you can sell it to. And eventually it evens out, like it did in the 50s in America. And in that sense, capitalism actually works once you provide the workforce with enough means and to actually have a decently paying job and to buy the products. Now all we're getting is cheap shit from overseas, which is basically going to last you for 1 or 2 years, no longevity. It's all going to break down. It has an inbuilt, inbuilt lifespan. Planned obsolescence is what they call it. And then once they raise up some sort of a, halfway middle class in other countries, then they're going to move to cheaper labor, let's say in Africa. Everybody, it's all about the lowest common denominator here. It's not about raising living standards. No, it's about raising the living standards of the super rich until they own everything. I mean, that's basically this crazy game plan and the short-term thinking of these people up top. So that's basically what we're faced with. That really is the bottom line. And nobody on a global level is going to agree to this eventually. They might be happy, to have slightly raised living standards in China and India for a little while, let's say, maybe 10, 15 years or something, until it all blows up in their own faces, just like it's blowing up here. The bottom line is the human species is living beyond their own means. And we need to curtail our goddamn consumption of crappy consumer shit that nobody needs and focus on some of the more important stuff. Nobody needs a new iPod, every year or every 6 months. All of us are involved in this, and I'm guilty of this as well, but we need to recognize this problem. And we can't support these kinds of policies in the long term. We can't. Good night.